out you got the president in the White House you wanted, we can breathe easier tonight, can't we?
Oh, yeah.
Because it's going to be 2.5 years before somebody starts running for president again. Right? Maybe 2, I don't know. You know, and if you are all out of stress now because you have nothing to stress over, it's only 45 days till Christmas. So, aren't I really getting off to a good start? Well, tonight I'm going to preach on one of my favorite subjects. Not necessarily my favorite, but it's a subject that I get to talk a lot about. Jesus talked a lot about it, and the world talks about it a lot. It's called hypocrisy. My title of my sermon tonight is, So What's Wrong with a Little Hypocrisy? That's we're going to try to figure out a way to preach on this tonight. You know, I've said this so many times, that if you ever find a church that has no hypocrites in it, don't join it. Right? Why? Because you ruin it, you know, if you do. There's a little hypocrisy in all of us, isn't there? Whether we like it or not. So what's wrong with a little hypocrisy? Well, tonight I'm going to tell you that hypocrisy starts way back in the ancient Greek world, where we started hearing this word. It's a Greek word. Hypocrisy, it's one of the biggest, Greek drama was one of the biggest entertainments in the ancient world. I mean, they were crazy about their theater. They went to watch the great dramas, the tragedies, they called them. The Greek drama always ended in tragedy, and so they called them the Greek tragedies. But people loved to go to the theater, much like today. We love entertainment. We like to do that. But what I'm trying to get to is that they're actors. We call them actors. Today, we call them actors. In the Greek world, they call them hypocrites. That was the term for an actor. Somebody was playing a role, playing a part. And the word in the Greek is hypocrite. So now you kind of get where this came from. Jesus took careful aim at people who pretended to be something that they're not. You and I, we all have I think Midwesterners, we've got a pretty sensitive hypocrite meter. We can kind of smell it, can't we? I don't know whether we're any better than anybody else, but most Midwesterners, we get around somebody that's trying to be something, you know, that they're not. And we just can say immediately, our flasher goes, oh, okay, I see where that person's coming from. They're trying to be something they're not. We want to be, what we try to do as Midwesterners is we be honest. We want to be ourselves. And you know, warts and all, what you see is what you get. That's kind of the philosophy and the values of Midwestern life. And you know, that's kind of the cowboy way too. Cowboys don't do a lot of pretending. We just come out and live our life. And if you don't like it, go someplace else. You know, that's kind of where we live, and we want to think through that. But anyway, so we want to look tonight at this group of people that Jesus called hypocrites. The Pharisees were that group that he zeroes in on pretty strong. They pretended to be God's gift to humanity, and they thought of themselves as just perfect in their own eyes. You know, they were perfection, and they thought really highly of themselves. But Jesus saw through their play acting, their facade, their staging, as it were, and he looked into their souls. And he has a way of doing that, and the Bible does that to us also. You know, we get to thinking we're something, and we get to feeling pretty good about ourselves, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But when we move into this thing called hypocrisy, we immediately have to realize that Jesus knows who we really are on the inside. Now, we always want our inside and our outside to match, right? That's what we want. We want that to match. I think hypocrisy is an issue in our world today. I think the hypocrisy has weakened the impact of the church a great deal. The world today has looked at the church and determined that we are somewhat irrelevant and not important. We don't match into our world. We're not And I think what's the problem is that we've not lived up to what we've preached. We said one thing, and then we've done something else. And that's hypocrisy. And that's something that's really, I think, hurting Christianity today in our world. We need to come back to the honesty, back to the, I was thinking when Rhonda was singing that song, back to that country church in the woods sort of mentality. I love that thought, and about how that would bring us back. And I don't mean to go back into be some way we are not any longer, but I mean that kind of thinking of honesty and just people coming together and worshiping the Lord. That's what changed our world to a better place. Now the church today is sort of in trouble on a international level. So the quickest way, I think, to turn our world back to Jesus is to live what we believe, to bring it right out. If we believe it, we live it. If we think it, we say it. If it's on the inside, it comes to the outside. We've got to make those match up. And when we do, we're going to give strength, power, vitality, energy back to the church, but not just the church, but our culture in general. Because judgment has to begin in the house of the Lord. So what's wrong with a little hypocrisy? Because that's what we're going to try to answer that question tonight. What's wrong with it? So we're now in the 44th verse of the 11th chapter of Luke. You will be so thrilled to know that Sunday we're going to go to the 12th chapter. We've been in Luke 11 for it seems like 3 or 4 years, doesn't it? But we're going to move to the 12th chapter on Sunday morning. But tonight we're going to look at what's wrong with a little hypocrisy. Why is that such a big deal? And why is it such a harmful thing? Let's read verse 44. Woe to you. Now remember, we talked about how woe, that's not what cowboy says to his horse. You know, that's one, it does say that, but this means, oh no, or oh my, oh how horrible. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. Now what's a hypocrite? A play actor. Somebody who is an actor in a play. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, for you are like graves which are not seen, and the men who walk over them are not aware of them. Okay, what in the world is going on here? Now we're going to have to go back into Judaism, into Phariseeism, and dig around in that to get what's going on here. Now, let's start. See, ritually clean Jewish people. If you were going to go to church, at the synagogue, if you were going to go to worship in the synagogue, you had to be ritually clean. You couldn't have done things that they considered unclean, and the list is long. All right, you could do something unclean and not even know it. For instance, if you touched a dead body, you were ritually unclean. You could not go to church if you just touched a dead body, or if you passed through the house of a non-koshered person that cooked food that wasn't kosher. If you ate there, or if you even went through their house, you were ritually unclean. And now I don't want to start making the list, because the list is huge and long that would make you ritually unclean. And even if you walked over a grave and you didn't know somebody was buried in the ground, and you walked over that grave not knowing it, then you could not go and participate in synagogue worship. You were excluded until you went through a ritual cleansing a certain time, and you had to go to the priest, and certain things were done, etc., etc. Now, so these people, Jesus is saying to these hypocrites, hey guys, people are becoming ritually unclean by just being around you, and they don't even know it. You do things that are hurting, offensive to people, and the people around you sometimes don't even know it. So the first thing I want to say tonight about what's wrong with a little hypocrisy is that it harms people in a way they don't always even realize it. And I think there's truth to that. I think that's a valid point. I tried to talk myself out of that, and I think it's a true statement. When we are hypocritic, and we do things that don't reflect the true us, the true me, the true you, and we do things, say things, think things, and we attitude people, and that word shouldn't fit in that way in the sentence, but you get it. When we have that attitude on folks, or we think this and say things, we become somewhat offensive to people, and they may not even understand all about it. You've been around folks that their attitudes have stunk, and they say things, And when you're around them, you just feel like you'd like to go take a bath, you know. So there are people in the world that their hypocrisy rubs off on us, even if they don't realize it is. Often wounds inflicted by hypocrisy are not seen. They lie deeply hidden in the heart. Now tonight, if I'm speaking to you and you have been wounded by hypocrisy, and I know with a congregation of this size, you've been in churches a lot. You've been in other churches. You've been in cowboy church a lot, a long time, many of you. And in those churches in your past, you've probably been hurt. That's so common in our world today. About how people, well, they didn't do what they said, or they didn't act the way they said they should act, or they've done things that were harmful to you, and you've been hurt by that. So I know tonight that I'm talking to some of you that have been invisibly wounded, and the arrow pierced your heart, and nobody knew you were bleeding out.
Oh, yes.
But you've been bleeding silently from a wound for many years, and some of you have even dropped out, and some would be here tonight, but they've been wounded, and they didn't realize we didn't realize they'd been hurt. But if you have been wounded, and that's where I'm going with this, if you've been hurt and you're here, you put up with it, and you've bucked up, and you've pushed through, and you soldiered on, and you're here, I want you to know tonight you can go to the Lord for healing. That's what I want to tell you. You can go to Him and say, Lord, you know my pain, you know my hurts, you know what's going on in my life. And I'm coming to you tonight for healing. Would you deal with that ugliness that's in me, and that disappointment, that failure that I've seen in others? And I want to be healed. Go to the Lord tonight, because I promise you that's the kind of God that He is and what He wants to do.
Oh, yes.
Now also I've noticed that if the hypocrisy, another thing that's wrong with it, is that it can often allow us to misplace blame. We can hand off blame to something else, or not take blame for ourselves, or we can misplace it. And what's the problem with misplacing blame? Well, when we do, we never get down to fixing the problem the original problem. For instance, if it's always somebody else's fault, and there's a lot of people like that. That wasn't my fault. That was so-and-so, he did that. Or I'm this way because my parents messed me up. And, or that first wife or that first husband I had, that was... And we hear all these stories about how we blame everybody for our lives. And if you just constantly pass the blame onto you see, it can't always be somebody else's fault. Sometimes it's going to be your fault. And if you don't deal with that, you'll never change it. And you'll keep repeating a failed lifestyle, a failed attitude, a failed process. And as they say, that's the definition of insanity. To repeat a failed process expecting a different outcome. That's just dumb. Okay. So let's read verse 45. Because I want to talk about tonight misplacing blame. Then one of the lawyers answered and said to him, Teacher, by saying these things, you reproach us also. In other words, you offend me, Jesus, when you said what you said. Okay? And Jesus said, Woe to you, lawyers! Woe to you also, lawyers! For you load men with burdens hard to bear, and you yourselves do not touch the burdens with one of your fingers. And I read the Bible with a twisted mind most of the time anyway. And I got tickled as I was preparing this when I thought, this lawyer said, Jesus, you offend me when you say that. And I was thinking, Jesus said, well, you were paying attention then, weren't you? Because that's what I meant to do. I had a story that we were teasing a young fellow one time about taking one of my nieces and marrying her and moving off to Europe. And it really happened. And he got home back to Europe, and he said, I don't think they like me over there very good. And when he came back and he said, I don't think they like me. I said, well, you were paying attention then, weren't you? We didn't want you to take our niece off to Europe. So Jesus said that he was trying to get their attention. The legalists of the Jewish religion, they could see the error or sin in others' lives, but they couldn't see it in their life. Anybody here guilty of that? We're really good. Oh, I can see your problem. I know what's wrong with you. But we don't look in our mirror. That's that mirror of the Bible or whatever. So they could see that more than their own. And I think it's always easier to see somebody else's problems or their sin than it is ourselves. So self-evaluation, looking in our own soul, looking in our mirror of life is very healthy spiritually. It's very healthy. And if you're not someone that will over time occasionally self-evaluate, you won't ever get fixed. You're not going to get corrected because you're going to believe a lie that you've told yourself, and hypocrisy is going to allow you to just keep repeating mistakes and failures. So it's okay to look in the mirror of God's Word, look into your own soul, and evaluate from time to time. Another thing I noticed as I was preparing to preach this is that it can keep past wrongs from being dealt with in our generation. In other words, we will want to pass it on to another generation, or we'll try to just, it kind of goes along with several other things we're dealing with tonight about passing it on, not looking in their own heart. So would you join me now and let's look at verse 47. This is we're going to read several verses here because this all kind of fits together in a blame passing situation where the Jews are looking back in their history and blaming things. So let's just read it. Woe to you, there is again that woe to you, for you build the tombs of the prophets. Now what's that mean? Jesus said you make shrines, you build edifices, you build churches, you build synagogues to honor these prophets of the Old Testament. He said, and they did that. This is where they would, where Elisha was buried or Elijah, and they make big deal out of shrines and okay. So Jesus says, woe to you, for you build the tombs of the prophets, and your fathers killed them. In fact, you bear witness that you approve of the deeds of your fathers, for they indeed killed them, and you build their tombs. Therefore, the wisdom of God also said, I will send them prophets and apostles, and some of them they will kill and persecute, so that the blood of all the prophets, which was shed from the foundation of the world, may be required on this generation. Jesus said, I'm going to hold this generation, first century people. He said, you guys, I'm holding you responsible for the blood of all the prophets that have been spilled all down through the Old Testament. Now let's keep going and see what Jesus has to say about this. 51. From the blood of Abel, who was Abel? Remember him? Can you go back into Genesis chapter 1? I think it's 1, and meet Cain and Abel. All right. The first murder on the planet when Cain killed Abel. Okay. It says from verse 51, from the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, who perished between the altar and the temple. Yes, I say to you, it shall be required of this generation. Now, what is Jesus saying here? He's saying that you guys are not taking the blame for the wrongs of your whole family from your generations back. And he says, but I'm going to lay the guilt of that and the blame of that on this generation. And what he means is that this is going to be the generation that crucifies the Messiah. And he's going to tell them that they're guilty of this all the way back and even including the present time. Now the Pharisees here, they were always, as I said, studying the ways of the prophets, but their fathers killed them. And oddly, I think there's some things like that have happened here in America. Did you know that? We've done the same thing here in America. For instance, our forefathers were guilty of many wrongs, and today we take the consequences for granted. We don't think about what we've done. Slavery, still a huge issue in modern America. Not that we have slavery, but we're dealing with the issues of segregation, of bigotry, of prejudice, even today. The assessment of a second class to descendants of slaves is still a huge issue in our world today. We're the black descendants of slaves, they don't feel like they're getting a fair share in our world today, and they're standing up and they're protesting, and there is some truth into what they're saying. We know There are other issues involved, but there is a root of truth here that we've not dealt with as a nation. And then it goes on. We literally stole the land from the American Indian. Are you aware of that?
Oh, yeah.
We said, scoot over, we're going to take it. From the Florida to the Carolinas to the Tennessees, we drove the Cherokee and the Creek and the Choctaw, Chickasaw, and the Aliquot, and all of them. That's almost started singing that song, Johnny K. We drove them all, and moved them out of their homeland. How would you like for an invading Mexican or Canadian army to come in and say, I'm sorry, we like your place here, we're going to leave, you're going to leave, and we're going to move in here. And if you don't move, we're going to kill you. And as we were moving, they killed us anyway, and that kind of, we moved them to reservations, we fed them tainted beef, gave them infected blankets, and when that all failed, our cavalry charged and murdered them. Are you aware that we've done that to people who live right here where we live?
Absolutely.
And I think we're not aware of that. We just pass that off. But we have been guilty in our nation in slavery and in the issues of the American Indian and on and on. Today, are we through with it? No, we're not through. You know who we're robbing today? Our grandchildren. You say, what are you talking about? We have accumulated enough debt in this nation that my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren will never be able to pay it off. And I don't want to get political here, but we've got to stop living at a standard of living being supported by borrowed money. We've got to get back to reality. We've got to come back and put this thing right, because we're robbing from our children and our grandchildren today. Hypocrisy. Now let's keep going. I've got a few more things I want to say. If you get tired, just go ahead and go home. I understand. It hides truth also, hypocrisy. It hides. Look at verse 52. Woe to you, lawyers, for you've taken away the key of knowledge. You did not enter in yourselves, and those who were entering you hindered. In other words, they had the information. They had the insight. They knew the Torah. They understood God's Word. And because they had so institutionalized it and so categorized it and kept it among the elite and the special leaders of the Jewish people, they weren't getting it down and weren't teaching it. Jesus said, you weren't going in and you were keeping others from getting this truth. So it hides from other generations. Let's move on, because I am going to run out of time. Hypocrisy detests being recognized for what it is. Look at verse 53. And as he said these things to them, the scribes and the Pharisees began to assail him vehemently and cross-examine him about many things, lying in wait for him and seeking to catch him in something he might say, that he might accuse them. Well, of course, nobody likes to be confronted with our problems, do we? We don't like to have to deal with our issues and our problems. And so when somebody like the preacher comes and talks to you about your problems, you get mad at the preacher sometimes. I understand that. I've done the same thing. But anger is not going to solve our problems in our world, in your life, in your family, in your church, in your nation. And we've got to honestly face them and take steps of confession and redemption and begin to deal with these issues in our life. And I want to close with this. Chapter 12, verse 1. In the meantime, when an innumerable multitude of people had gathered together, so that they trampled one another, he began to say to his disciples, first of all, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. Folks, listen to me. I want you to know that nothing is going to be hidden in your life that won't be uncovered. It's going to all be brought out before the Lord. So stop the pretense. As I've said so many times here at the Cowboy Church, if you're going to drive like the devil, take the church letters off your bumper. Stop saying a honk if you love Jesus, and then driving like the devil. I guess that's one way to understand it. Let's make our inside match up with our outside. Amen? Let's do that. If you don't know tonight the Lord, if you've never been saved, there is one thing that's keeping you from the life you're wanting, and that's your stubbornness, your unrepentance, and your lack of confession. Tonight, if you don't know Jesus, confess your sin. Humble your heart before the Lord and receive His forgiveness. It's the only thing that will ever fix you and get you right in this world.
Stay.